This video is sponsored by Skillshare. Hey, welcome to 12 Tone. In 1826, a periodical called the Ladies' Monthly Museum published an article about the composer Carl Maria von Weber, where they described music as the universal language of nature. A decade later, the poet Henry Wadsworth Longfellow wrote that music is the universal language of mankind. This sentiment has been repeated many times in the centuries that followed, and it's not hard to see why. The idea that the art of music somehow transcends cultural boundaries, allowing communication and understanding between people all over the world, is certainly a romantic one, but is it true? Well, the question of whether or not music is actually even a language to begin with is probably better left up to the linguists, so I'll skip it and just dive right into the real heart of the quote. Is music universal? And the answer, sadly, is no. Sorry. But how can that be? I mean, I'm sure we've all heard that music is, at its heart, basically just math, and math doesn't care where you grew up. The same numbers are prime whether you're in New York or Shanghai, so how can music not be universal if it's built on something as objective as math? Well, I'll let you in on a secret. The math that music is built on doesn't actually work. That pains me to say because music math is like my favorite thing, but if I'm being completely honest, it's hard to deny that it's all a bit of a mess. Like, take intervals. At a mathematical level, an interval is really just a frequency ratio. If one sound wave is hitting your ear twice as fast as another, you've got a 1:2 ratio, which is what we call an octave. Another common ratio is 2:3, which we're told is a perfect fifth, but here's the thing. If you go play a perfect fifth on a piano, you won't actually hear a 2:3 ratio. Or at least you probably won't, because modern tuning doesn't have any. And this isn't just because we're too lazy to tune it correctly. This is about a fundamental conflict between math and art. It's fairly easy to prove that a system can't simultaneously have both perfect octaves and perfect fifths. Or perfect fifths anyway. Music names are weird. Point is, the entire history of Western tuning is basically just a series of attempts to work around this gaping hole in the numbers. Early systems often involved just distorting one of the fifths and then hiding it between rarely used notes so no one would notice, but that creates problems with some of the other intervals, and these days what we do is just pretend the 2:3 ratio is slightly smaller than it actually is so that the whole thing fits together nicely. But which solution we're using doesn't really matter. The point is that we have to make decisions. We know it's impossible to get everything we want, so we're forced to make sacrifices, and which aspects we're willing to let go of says a lot about what sorts of music we want to make. For example, one reason modern tuning tweaks all its fifths a little bit, instead of just completely ruining one of them, is that we've decided it's important to be able to easily change keys, so we need to be able to use all the notes equally. That's not a mathematical decision though, it's an artistic one, and it's one that different cultures at different points in history have made, well, differently. But music is more than just math. It's a means of expressing emotion, and since people tend to experience roughly the same set of emotions, maybe music can help us communicate our feelings when we don't have the words to describe them directly. I mean, we've all heard that major scales are happy and minor scales are sad, right? And that goes back to the math thing. Major intervals tend to be much simpler ratios than minor ones, so they sound more consonant and thus happy. Sure, we saw the math didn't quite work out, but our ears are pretty good at adjusting for slight variations, so as long as we're in the ballpark, shouldn't that sense of consonance translate across cultures? Well, first of all, the idea that major is happy and minor is sad is not wrong exactly, but definitely an oversimplification. Like, here's a short little melody I wrote. Listen to it and try to identify the implied emotion. I mean, it's definitely minor. It's basically just a walk down the D minor scale. But is it sad? That's not the word I'd use. It feels adventurous, maybe even triumphant, and if you're not getting those same emotions, well, that kind of proves my point too, doesn't it? But more importantly, the very idea of consonance isn't necessarily universal. Most of the big musical cultures in the world have some concept that certain combinations of notes sound more pleasant than others, but what exactly that looks like varies a lot. At the extreme end, studies with isolated Amazonian tribes have shown that at least some of them exhibit literally no preference between traditionally consonant and traditionally dissonant sounds, so this and this were both rated as equally pleasant. This implies that even our most fundamental reactions to music are at some level learned through exposure, and they don't come already programmed into the human brain. But for me, the biggest argument against the universal language theory lies not in the Amazon, but somewhere a little less physical. That's right, we're going on a field trip to the world of experimental music. I just did a whole video on it, so we're not going to dive too deep here, but that's fine because I only need one example. Pendulum Music by Steve Reich. In it, speakers are placed face up on the floor and microphones swing freely across them, creating feedback when they get close. As the name implies, Reich believes this is music, and I would agree with him, but a lot of people don't. Whether experimental pieces like Pendulum Music actually count as music is still pretty hotly debated to this day. But here's the thing, if music was was a universal language, don't you think we could at least agree whether or not someone is speaking it? And this goes the other way too, which brings me to the adhan, or the Muslim call to prayer. You've probably heard it before, and if you're not Muslim, there's a good chance you thought it was sung, but it's usually not even considered music. And that matters because music is traditionally forbidden in mosques. But it's not just not music because they say so. The adhan is delivered with a specific style of recitation that is structurally very different from the Arabic concept of singing. This is, of course, a complex issue, and as a non-Muslim, I'm probably not the best person to get into the details, but my point is that we have this thing that Westerners might hear as music, but to the people making it, not only is it often not considered music, but it's culturally important that it's not, and imposing musicality on the adhan from the outside just because we can't tell the difference is inaccurate, insensitive, and potentially offensive. But again, if music is a universal language, that really shouldn't be possible. Before we wrap up, it's worth noting that I'm far from the first person to contemplate this question. In fact, this entire video was inspired by a post by Dr. Linda Shaver Gleason over on her blog, Not Another Music History Cliché. It's a great blog, and if you're at all interested in music history or musicology, I definitely recommend checking it out. There's a link in the description. Dr. Shaver Gleason was even kind enough to review this script for me, so huge thanks to her for that. But back to the question, this is all dancing around an uncomfortable truth. While music may not be a universal language right now, it's kind of becoming one. For various historical reasons, the Western musical tradition has spread its tendrils across pretty much the entire planet. Again, researchers had to turn to isolated Amazonian tribes to find people who hadn't already been exposed to Western musical ideas. More and more cultures are incorporating Western concepts, especially in their popular music, and if that trend continues, maybe one day we'll reach a point where music truly is a universal language, spoken the same by all humanity. But if that day ever comes, it will be nothing to celebrate. It'll mean the death of musical traditions that have survived for thousands of years, and the culture of the world will be poorer for their loss. So no, music is not a universal language, and I really hope it stays that way. If you want to learn more about the myriad ways humans have found to make music, I'd recommend this video's sponsor, Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning platform with over 20,000 lessons in just about everything. One that I'd recommend is a course on Tuvan throat singing called Find Your Voice of Nature. I've mentioned it before, but it seemed relevant here, and it's a really interesting look into a very different musical culture. Skillshare is offering 2 free months of premium membership to the first 500 12-tone viewers to click the link in the description, and while you're there, why not check out the rest of their massive collection of educational resources? They've got lots of great stuff about all sorts of topics, so no matter what you want to learn, Skillshare's probably got a course on it. Plus, it's really affordable. Premium membership starts at less than $9 a month, and that's after the 2-month free trial, which, again, link in the description. And hey, thanks for watching, and thanks to our Patreon patrons for supporting us and making these videos possible. If you want to help out and get some sweet perks like sneak peeks of upcoming episodes, there's a link to our Patreon on screen now. You can also join our mailing list to find out about new episodes, like, share, comment, subscribe, and above all, keep on rockin'.